Why did you decide to do your own show and become a TV host?
Well, there's two reasons. First of all, being under house arrest for so long, it's nice to have an occasional visitor and to learn more about the world. And given that the conversations we were having are quite interesting, why not film it and show other people what was going on? So that's one reason. The second reason is that as someone who's given a lot of interviews before, and it's been on the receiving end of very aggressive interview styles, I found that I wasn't giving much away in these interviews at all. That pretty quickly you learn to just give your sort of standard defensive responses, so people don't take what you've said out of context. And I want to have a different sort of approach with other people. And why that approach has been difficult in some ways, I think it has also succeeded in other ways, in that we've revealed sides of very interesting and important people that are not normally revealed, because they're not dealing with a standard interviewer. They're dealing with someone who's under house arrest, who has gone through political problems that they can sympathise with.
And how easy did you find it moving sort of from one side of the desk to the other, becoming the interviewer?
It was a lot harder than I thought it was. In the beginning, very hard. As time went by, like everything, you start getting better at it. The constraints of the medium, the constraints of time, the constraints of cameras, the constraints of people crowding the intimate space that an interview occurs in, really does funnel the types of conversations that can occur into a particular direction. So you'll see, for example, when we do a satellite feed and we've only got 45 minutes, actually the interaction, and it's going through translation, the interaction is much more similar to a conventional interview, where we have the sort of luxury of 3 hours and having people here personally. It moves much more to a sort of conversation. So I have more sympathy with these people who are interviewing me as well, understanding that the constraints of the medium are one of the pernicious factors. But they're not the only pernicious factor. There's also the constraints of the organisation behind the medium.
So how did you get to know RT, and why did you choose RT for the broadcast of your first programme?
We've seen RT's reportage on the attacks on WikiLeaks for a number of years, and that reportage has generally been quite supportive. When we were looking what international broadcaster we wish to partner with as opposed to national broadcasters, we looked to see what was the penetration into the United States. And RT had higher penetration in the United States than Al Jazeera. BBC is the leading contestant, but the BBC has been acting in a hostile manner towards us, so we didn't consider that the BBC would be an appropriate partner.
RT aims to provide this kind of alternative view to those aired by the international mainstream channels. Is your choice of RT as a platform for your interview show your kind of response to that mainstream media?
Well, it is a response in seeing that a lot of the things that we have been trying to report have not been carried accurately in the mainstream press. Now, there are many, many fine exceptions, but when we look at international networks, there's really only two that are worth speaking about, and that is RT and Al Jazeera. The other international networks are, as far as WikiLeaks issues are concerned, are too busy considering their own national agenda. Now, if WikiLeaks had been producing a voluminous material about Russia, perhaps that situation would be different. But in the case that we are in at the moment, where our major confrontation is with the West, although we have published material from many countries, RT is a natural partner to produce our material. Also the same with Al Jazeera, but RT has had greater penetration into the United States.
The show's going to be launched on RT, but have you received offers from other channels? Has anyone else approached you with purchase offers?
Yes, we received offers from other channels, and we are sub-licensing the show to other national broadcasters. RT is our international broadcaster in the sense that CNN or Al Jazeera or the BBC is the international broadcaster.
You've worked closely with what we called the mainstream media in the past. What did that teach you about them?
Any organisation, once it grows to a sufficient size and has sufficient influence, starts having to make political compromises. And media organisations, by their very nature, engage in the political sphere. So the editors and publishers of media organisations have to sit down at the table with powerful groups, and they start becoming captured by those powerful groups. And so we have found that in working with them, when we're trying to get out our material through organisations, say, such as The Guardian or the New York Times or the BBC, that these organisations self-censor in a tremendously frequent manner. And in a way which is against their stated values. It's not just against our values, it's against their stated values, and in some cases even against the contracts that we have made with those organisations.
And you mentioned several specific publications and channels there. What response do you expect from the international mass media, some of whom you've already fallen out with, right? Do you expect a level of criticism, and if so, why?
Of course. I mean, those organisations like the New York Times that we have refused to work with based upon what they were doing back in 2010. Although we do work with individual journalists at the New York Times and individual journalists in other institutions that we've found problems with. I assume that, you know, that they will attack. I mean, just like they do when any competing media organisation releases a big story, they always write against the story.
What sort of form do you expect that criticism to take? Let's
imagine the sort of obvious one. There's Julian Assange, an enemy combatant, a traitor, getting into bed with the Kremlin and interviewing terrible radicals from around the world. But I think that's it's a pretty trivial kind of attack on character. If they actually look at how the show is made, we make it, we have complete editorial control. We believe that all media organisations have an angle, all media organisations have an issue. RT is a voice of Russia, so it looks at things from a Russian agenda. The BBC is a voice of the British government. The Voice of America is a voice of the American government. And it is the clashing of these voices together that reveals the truth about the world as a whole. Our issue at the moment is that we are in a legal confrontation with the Department of Justice in the United States as a result of our recent publications, which concern the United States. So it's very natural in order for us to speak about the way we see the world and interesting figures in the world, we need to partner with organisations that are actually capable of speaking. And unfortunately, the majority of the big networks in the United States are now not capable of effectively criticising US military power or the abuse of US military power.
Were you restrained by editorial policies while you were making the programme for RT?
No, not at all. We make the programme, it is made an independent British production company, and the international broadcaster we've chosen is RT. So at no stage has any editorial control been exercised, and no stage was it capable of being exercised by RT.
And have you found that to be true?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there has been no interference in the show at all.
When you were choosing the guests, what were your criteria?
Well, the single biggest criteria is that they would come on the show. Now that's quite interesting, because there are a number of guests that we couldn't get. And so let's talk about that sort of hidden censorship. So we're still trying, but our Weiwei, who's currently imprisoned under house arrest in China, he views that his political situation makes it extremely difficult for him to speak to the media at all. Khodorkovsky, in a prison in Russia, was a billionaire oligarch who's being imprisoned. So we would like to speak to him. We can't. He's in prison. Then if we look at some of the big US insiders, so people that who are the tops of power of some giant US corporations, that we have indirect personal contact with. So some of them say, no, it's too dangerous as far as the US government is concerned. Yes, I would love to help you. Yes, I'd like to do the show, but politically it's just too dangerous. So then we go to the other groups that we have chosen, and we did actually get most of those. So those are people who normally don't get a voice.
Could any of the guests that you have got, do you think, appear on a mainstream TV network?
Some could, some couldn't. Some have, quite a few haven't. What is fair to say is that the majority of what they have said to me, they could not say on a mainstream TV network. That is not just because of self-censorship of the networks. It's because my style of interaction, as someone who has been interviewed by the media many, many times, I understand the faults in that format. And so I wanted something that looked at the sort of the depth in the situations that they had. So a way of pulling out their story about their situation from their own perspective, and not just something that would fit a media soundbite. And in dealing with me, they understand that they're not just dealing with a host, they're not just dealing with a reporter. They're dealing with someone who's been through a very trying, dangerous and difficult political situation. So they can speak to a degree as equals because they understand that I understand. For example, most of the guests that I interviewed have been in prison at some stage. I've been in prison. So immediately there's a sort of rapport that is present that is not present in a regular interview.
Would you invite anyone from Russia's political opposition to be on your programme, and if so, who do you think it might be?
Yes, we've invited a number of people from Russia's political opposition. The Russian election cycle interfered with that because of their schedule and availability, but we'll see if they'll turn up. But we've invited nearly all the prominent figures. And we've invited people from the Russian government as well to try and get some balance.
Are you going to use any new WikiLeaks data for this project?
We have actually used it for some of the questions for some people. But it is not, in general, you know, we're not using this show to present new WikiLeaks data, but for occasional guests, the information that we have is quite interesting.
And are any of your guests sort of directly linked to WikiLeaks information?
Oh yes, yes. There's nearly all the guests are in our information in one way or another.
To what extent did the restricting of your freedom of movement kind of interfere in the making of the programmes?
Well, the restriction of my freedom of movement is what caused the programmes. You know, now I have been over 460 days detained without charge, and I was used to going around the world from place to place where the greatest political dynamics were, where we could be of most assistance. And so it's quite isolating, to be frank, to be stuck out in the English countryside under those conditions. So this all began as a way of bringing people to me so we could understand what was actually happening in the world, because we need to understand, as part of running WikiLeaks, what is actually happening.
Julian Assange, thank you very much.
Thank you.